Welcome to the Invite Health podcast, where our degreed healthcare professionals are excited to offer you the most important health and wellness information you need to make informed choices about your health. You can learn more about the products discussed in each of these episodes and all that Invite Health has to offer at www.invitehealth.com/podcast. First-time customers can use promo code podcast at checkout for an additional 15% off your first purchase. Let's get started.
Last year, with politics and with the COVID-19 pandemic, anxiety was like rampant, but it's still around. It's fairly common. Basically, it's an apprehensive uneasiness, like basically a fear of a future event. So people with anxiety disorders, the clinical disorders, they frequently have intense, very excessive, very persistent worry. They fear about everyday situations, leaving the house, crossing a bridge, walking near water, whatever it might be, heights, etc. Anxiety disorders can include repeated episodes of feeling intense anxiety and fear or terror. Now, this can reach a peak within minutes. That's called a panic attack. And now, anxiety and panic, they interfere with everyday activities. They can interfere with relationships. They can interfere with your job, your quality of life. They have to be out of proportion with the actual danger and can last a long time, these clinical diagnoses. So there is short-term anxiety, like, you're going to speak publicly, or you got a bad grade at school, you're in high school and you got a bad grade on your report card and you don't want to bring it home to your parents, especially on a Friday night before the weekend. But then, of course, there's the diagnoses of anxiety disorders. So example of these clinical disorders are generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder. I have to tell you, I don't exactly like parties. I wonder if I have just a little touch of that. It's a social phobia. Then there's specific phobias, like I said, going across a bridge. And then there's separation anxiety disorders. So then there's, the common signs and symptoms of anxieties, like feeling nervous, feeling tense, even sometimes feeling restless. But you have this feeling of impending doom, impending panic, impending danger. Your heart rate can speed up. Some people hyperventilate when it's really getting bad. They're breathing very rapidly and shallowly. It's setting off your nervous system, so you can have sweating, you can have trembling, feeling exhausted, having trouble focusing and concentrating. Your stomach gets upset, because your digestive tract's attached to your brain, really. And of course, you're going to have trouble sleeping. So if it's interfering with your career, your work, or your relationships, or, parts of your life, having fun, you really should get checked out. Should you see a psychiatrist? I've always believed more in, and don't get mad at me if you're a psychiatrist, I love psychopharmacologists. They're pharmacologists, so it's like beyond a pharmacist who also studies psychiatry, because they really know the biochemistry of the brain, and sometimes this is just a chemical imbalance. But we're here today to talk about things that are natural helpers, not exactly 100% remedies, but really helping people with anxiety and fears. So if your fear or your anxiety is upsetting you and it's really difficult to control, you should get it looked into, because the anxiety can lead to depression, alcohol abuse, drug dependency, drug abuse, but also suicidal ideation. Suicidal ideation is thinking about suicide. I once read a report of people who attempted suicide and somehow survived. For instance, they jumped off a bridge or they took an overdose of sleeping pills. And all of them said in this report, when I did what I did, like jump off the bridge, I said to myself, why'd I do that? In time, I could have fixed this. Every one of them. So please, don't give up. Don't give up the ship. Life gets better. Life changes. So let's look at things, and I'm not trained in psychology, sociology, or anything like that. I'm a pharmacist, also trained in nutrition. So here's phytotherapy research. Phytotherapy is the therapeutic use of plants, like herbs, and also the things that come out of plants, like carotenoids and polyphenols. And they're looking at Rhodiola Rosea, which is one of my favorite herbs. Rhodiola is often called Viking ginseng. It's like the biggest selling herb up in Norway. The Vikings used to get through their tough winters because it's good for the immune system, it's good for energy, it's good for endurance, it's good for stress. So, they had a tough place, a really tough long winter, a short summer. When they traveled, they were open to the elements. They had a tough life. A lot of them were infected with worms, which we call in pharmacy helminths. So they had helminths infestation. Wherever they traveled, they took rhodiola with them. So rhodiola is growing up by Norway and Sweden and Denmark and Finland, and over in the islands off of Scotland, and it's growing in parts of Ireland, because the Vikings were in Scotland and England and Ireland. It's growing in Siberia and near Russia. It's growing in Iceland, and it's growing in Canada. And it's really one of my favorite herbs. So this is the University of Surrey, that's in England, the School of Psychology, and also their School of Biosciences and Medicine. So their medical school, their science school, their psychology school. And they're looking, does rhodiola help anxiety, stress, and other mood symptoms? So these are 80 mildly anxious people. One group got rhodiola, the other group did not. And they took one before breakfast and one before lunch in a controlled condition. Over a period of 2 weeks, relative to the controls, the group on rhodiola reported a big improvement in their anxiety, their fears, their panic, a big improvement in their symptoms of stress. I mean, let's face it, if you're getting anxious about something or you're stressed out like it's work, you're not going to quit your job. So better to deal with the symptoms, all right? It took care of their anger, their confusion, and it lifted their mood. It improved their depression over the 2-week period. And it was very safe. So, see, that's the thing. It's worth a try. And it's safe to take if you're using a drug for anxiety. Sometimes they use antidepressants. Sometimes they use drugs like Valium. It can cause chemical dependency. Rhodiola is safe to add to those. Rhodiola is safe to try on its own. You might as well try these things because they're safe. And the research is showing they do help. Most of the studies on rhodiola have been for fatigue, extreme stress, tension, but also anxiety. Here's L-theanine. I have several studies on L-theanine. Now, I love L-theanine. L-theanine comes out of the tea plant. You don't get much in white tea or green tea. You get a little bit. But it's kind of like that moment of zen when you drink tea. It's soothing. That's the L-theanine. And you don't really get it in black tea or oolong tea. It's kind of like not in there anymore. It's changed into other things in those teas. It's converted into polyphenols, like condensed tannins. In any event, that's the black stuff in oolong tea and black tea tannins, like theaflavin and theorubigen. So you don't really have the theanine anymore. And in the green tea, it's being converted into something that's been shown to help reduce the risk of cancers called EGCG. So you want that in the green tea, right? So L-theanine is an amino acid. Now, normally amino acids are in protein and they make things, but L-theanine works on its own. And the major source is the tea plant. Early on, they have to use a certain amount of tea to get a certain amount of theanine. Many, many human clinical trials, it's calming, it's soothing, it helps you focus, but yet you're not sleepy. It's like this pleasant feeling of awake alertness. So like I've used L-theanine on days when I had a lot of radio programs and I had to do podcast episodes and I got to do a lot of writing. And I keep on switching from job to job, yet I'm really pressed for time. So like just want to focus and get it done and be creative. L-theanine takes away all the noise, all the craziness in the brain and lets you really get your job done. And it doesn't interfere with creativity. It seems to promote creativity. So it's soothing, it's calming. Like I said, it's a moment of zen. And it's really safe. Now, there's one other thing. You only need 100 milligrams of theanine in the daytime typically to calm down. Like I have a lot of professional drivers, they drive trucks and cabs and limos and Uber, etc., who will see me in my stores in Manhattan or Queens or Brooklyn, and they're stressed out, and I say, well, take a theanine because you could take 100 milligrams of theanine and it won't affect you driving. It's not going to make you woozy or anything. But in these studies on anxiety, they're using higher potencies. Now, at night, if I wake up prematurely, like if I wake up at 3 o'clock, I'm a really sound sleeper, but if my wife gets up but a dog's bark or something, it'll wake me up. I'll take 2 L-theanine or 3 L-theanine, like 200 milligrams or 300 milligrams, and I get back to sleep in like 5 or 10 minutes. And because, what happens if I wake up prematurely at night, like at 3 in the morning, I start thinking about my radio broadcasts and I'm fully awake within seconds. So I take the theanine, it takes away all that noise and everything, and I'm able to get back to sleep. And when I have to get up, there's no hangover effect. L-theanine is really cool. This is the journal Pharmacological Research. It's researchers in different academic research institutions in Brazil, but also the College of Health and Environmental Sciences, University of Worcester. That's in England. In any event, they talk about theanine being safe, and they're talking about recent clinical studies have proposed promising adjuvant effects of L-theanine for the impact of anxiety and psychological stress, their impact on health. So adjuvant means adding it safely to the medication. So they go on to say, by the way, this is Pharmacological Research, September 2019. Published data, L-theanine at daily doses ranging from 200 milligrams to 400 milligrams. So I would take 100 milligrams like 3 to 4 times a day for up to 8 weeks. It's very safe. And it has an anxiolytic effect. Now, anxiolytic means it deals with anxiety. That's what that means. But also for stress. And this is for acute and chronic conditions. So acute means it's just that day. Chronic means it's long-term. And they said lower doses might also be effective. So it's really worth a try because it's so safe. So here's a second one. Plant Foods in Human Nutrition, March 2020. It's the Faculty of Health, University of Canberra, that's in Australia, the Australian National University Medical School, a Research Institute for Sports and Exercise, that's also in Canberra, the School of Medicine, University of Notre Dame, Australia, Aston Medical School in Birmingham, that's in England, and they're looking at L-theanine. And they said L-theanine is associated with several health benefits, including improvements in mood, so that's like depression and stress, cognition, and a reduction of stress and anxiety-like symptoms. And once again, it's really safe, so it's worth a try. It really is worth a try. It's incredibly soothing. So they found 9 peer-reviewed journals with articles on L-theanine compared to a control. 200 milligrams to 400 milligrams a day of L-theanine assists in reducing the symptoms of anxiety and symptoms of stress in people exposed to stressful conditions. So that's like temporary anxiety, but any stress, that's for sure. Any stressful situation, it's amazing for. But let's look at fish oils now. So we looked at L-theanine. We looked a little bit at rhodiola, a great herb. They also call it Viking ginseng, which is pretty cool. Now we're looking at fish oils. This is brain, behavior, and immunity. It's Ohio State University College of Medicine, their Institute for Behavioral Medicine Research. And they said studies link fish oils and basically helping with inflammation and depression, where higher levels of omega-6 fatty acids compared to your omega-3, I'll explain that in a second, are linked to inflammation and depression. So let's talk about that. Omega-6 fatty acids are generally vegetable oils. Now, eating vegetables, you get very little oil. They have to use a lot of vegetable to get oils when they're making corn oil or soybean oil or, any of those. And we're not talking olive oil here. That's a different thing. That's not an omega-6. That's an omega-9 fatty acid. Same with avocados, same with walnuts. That's omega-9. Omega-3 would be flaxseed and fish oils or krill oil, and omega-6 is vegetable oils. So the problem in America, we get more omega-6 and less omega-3 than we need. There's an imbalance. In the old days in foods, a lot of foods had omega-3 fatty acids. But in the setting of a supermarket, the omega-3 fatty acids make the food go bad fairly rapidly. So they farmed omega-3 fatty acids out of foods. That's one reason why people want grass-fed beef, because there's more omega-3 fatty acids compared to omega-6 fatty acids in the beef, which is purportedly healthier. So they find an imbalance in Americans. Too much omega-6, not enough omega-3. And this leads to problems with the brain, like depression, anxiety, stress, but also problems with the immune system. It increases your inflammation. So it would be bad for the prostate, bad for the colon, bad for the heart, bad for the brain, bad for the eyes, bad for breasts. It's just not a good thing. It's not that omega-6 are bad. It's that we're out of balance in our diet. We need to restore the omega-3s. And here's the issue. Omega-3s with age are harder and harder to absorb from foods like fish. So at a certain point, you really need to take fish oils or krill oil. I take krill oil. They're both great. I just like krill a little bit better because there's additional ingredients for my brain, and it does a little bit better a job for reducing inflammation in the heart, because inflammation in the heart is one of the leading causes of heart attacks. Other than high cholesterol, that's the other leading cause. So it's an imbalance of omega-6. Omega-6 are not inherently bad. It's just we have too much omega-6 because they add it to all the processed foods like crazy, and not enough omega-3. So here they're saying an imbalance. Lower omega-3 to higher omega-6 leads to inflammation and depression. So this is a parallel group, placebo-controlled human clinical trial, double-blinded. So it's a state-of-the-art human clinical trial, gold standard, over 3 months, comparing fish oils with placebo. 68 medical school students. The students received either 2.5 grams of fish oils a day or placebo capsules, which look just like the fish oils. Compared to those on the placebo, on the fish oils, there was a 14% reduction in interleukin-6. Now, that's really important. Interleukin-6 is normally released by the immune system to fight infection, but excessive interleukin-6 really damages the body. For instance, with COVID-19, that cytokine storm that destroyed the lungs, that was interleukin-6 mostly. And in people with heart failure and plaque stiffening and thickening their blood vessel walls, interleukin-6 greatly accelerates damage to the heart and blood vessels and is a very bad sign for survival. Not a good sign. By the way, they've connected ubiquinol levels to lowering interleukin-6 in people with heart disease and heart failure. So that's an important finding. But that's a different podcast. That's a different episode. So they found that interleukin-6 dropped by 14% on fish oils, and anxiety was reduced by 20%. Now, that's pretty darn good, because drugs for anxiety typically make you very sleepy. Fish oils don't make you sleepy. Secondary analysis, where they used the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids, showed that reducing the level of omega-6 as a ratio to omega-3, in other words, raising the omega-3, led to lower anxiety symptoms and reductions in interleukin-6 and also tumor necrosis factor alpha, which is another inflammatory chemical in the immune system that, when it's expressed too much, is not good for you. So I'll give you, for instance, TNF-alpha is released in cancer patients with cachexia, where their body's getting cannibalized and they're basically wasting away, that wasting syndrome. That's tumor necrosis factor alpha. So fish oil was getting that under control. So here's what they said. This data indicates that fish oils can reduce inflammation and anxiety even among healthy young adults. So that's pretty cool. So if you have some like temporary anxiety, I would use it for any kind of anxiety. I would use fish oils. And like I said, with age, fish oils become less and less absorbable from foods like fish, like salmon. So you really need to get a fish oil supplement. And I'll give you a second problem. Statin drugs, according to the data I found, also lower fish oils in your body. So if you're on a statin, like atorvastatin, simvastatin, rosuvastatin, you actually need more fish oils than you would normally take for heart health and for bone health and for muscle health and for memory and brain health. If you're anxious, you can look into rhodiola. It's safe and it's good for energy. It's good for stamina. It's good for endurance. You can look into L-theanine from the tea plant. You can look into fish oils. I'm going to continue with more on anxiety. I'll do a second part to this episode. So thank you for tuning into the Invite Health Podcast. You can find all of our episodes for free wherever you listen to podcasts or by visiting invitehealth.com/podcast. Please subscribe and please leave us a review. I'd love to know how we're doing. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Invite Health. So I hope to see you next time on the second part of this podcast. Thanks for listening.